I was planning to focus more on the two groups that have been the most interesting in the Champions League and had the most going on this final match day. Except we need to talk about something else first. And that other thing is what Benfica did to somehow top Group H ahead of PSG. To put this into context, so PSG and Benfica had been basically as close as you can be the entire way through this. No goals, 2 draws, same amount of goals scored then, obviously. Same scoreline, so there was nothing separating them in the head-to-head matchups. They had also picked up the exact same amount of points. PSG came in with goal differential advantage and were winning the tiebreaker. Except Benfica started scoring all these goals to the point where it started getting into a conversation about, well, actually, if Benfica can get the goal difference level, they're going to win on, I believe it's tiebreaker 6 away goals in the group. And so, they get 3 and then they get 4. And it doesn't even seem like Benfica is aware that they're actually only 2 goals away from topping this group. And they get another one. And instead of going to try and immediately get the ball and continue to keep playing, they celebrate. And then João Mario scores. And all of a sudden they have this 6-1 win. PSG do beat Juventus. They only do so 2-1. And so, sure enough, it ends level on goal difference. It goes to this other tiebreaker. And Benfica have topped this group. I have mentioned this team multiple times before. They are not just some feel-good story. They think about what they just did. In the head-to-head matchups and in the other 4 games in this group, they went toe-to-toe with PSG. It wasn't like they were scraping by and PSG were blowing these teams outright. They had to go all the way down the tiebreaker list because they matched PSG all the way through. They just scored 6 without even really trying. They are undefeated domestically with a 6-point lead in the Premier Liga. What else is there for them to prove? It would be one thing if they got the fortune of being in a really easy group where they were just better than everybody else, and so you can say, yeah, what happens if they go up against the top teams in this competition? They're in a group with Juventus and PSG, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that was a admirable effort by a severely shorthanded Juventus today. I'm going to give them a hard time because of Andrea Agnelli and his arrogance, so when they show up and perform well, it's only fair I acknowledge that as well. Wasn't enough to win, but they were incredibly depleted and put up a very, very good fight against PSG. Back to Benfica, though. They just topped a group with PSG and Juventus in it. They have been consistently excellent domestically. And now they have the added benefit of being a group winner. They not only can advance in the round of 16, they need to be taken seriously as contenders. More of the dark horse kind than the, favorites. But this is different than Villarreal kind of just finding a way and knocking out some teams. It was always hard to believe that Villarreal were going to be able to keep up with the best of the best. Juventus only carries so much weight. We're really good to get by Bayern, but there was always kind of just, at least for me, this feeling that it was going to run out at some point. They were too reliant on the defensive structure and kind of winning ugly, which is a formula for success in knockout tournaments. The problem is you're not going to be able to stop everybody. You got to be, it's the same conversation about having throughout the MLS playoffs. You got to be able to do both. You got to be able to defend and you got to be able to score. I know it sounds really simple, but sometimes that part doesn't get acknowledged. You got to be really good going forward too, or eventually you're going to have what happened against Liverpool, where you can play really well and it doesn't go your way. 30 minutes, the other team is brilliant. They got full world class attackers, and there goes your Champions League. This Benfica team can score goals with anybody. They are built. To me, they are well balanced enough that they can, they hung in there with PSG without letting them score a bunch of goals. They showed what they can do defensively, and they're also showing you what they can do in attack. They have it would be incredible if they actually went on and pulled this off. But the conversation needs to be the same thing as it would be for a Napoli, a Chelsea, a Tottenham, an AC Milan, right? These teams that you're not viewing as the favorites. They're not the best teams in the world. But it's, certainly they can knock somebody out. Do they have a chance to win this whole thing? That is the conversation Benfica needs to be involved in now. I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about this because that is one of the most incredible things I have ever seen in the Champions League group stage. I have my criticisms of the Champions League group stage. This week was a perfect example of there just wasn't that much that was all that interesting because so much had already been decided. And then one of the important games I'm about to talk about was not interesting at all. But then you get something like this. I could not believe what I was watching. It is truly one of the most impressive things, unbelievable things I have seen in the Champions League. To me, this is right up there with any kind of upset you can think about. Not only what Benfica have done, but specifically the way that this played out, and they just kept scoring goals and got the ones they needed to actually end up atop this group. Absolutely unbelievable. This team is 100% legit. There are no holes to poke. The conversation is how far can they go in this tournament? Can they win the whole thing? Speaking of uninteresting games, AC Milan thumped Red Bull Salzburg 4-0 in a game Salzburg needed to win to jump AC Milan and get that final spot in Group E. It did not happen. It did not happen in large part because Salzburg were atrocious defensively. Yes, AC Milan were good. AC Milan's best players showed up and were incredibly dangerous. Some of those goals, though, you just can't give AC Milan that kind of time, those kind of chances in the box without clearing stuff. There was the one where Rafael Leao ran all the way around from one side of the penalty box to the other, and then I think the ball bounced at least once or twice in the box before, I'm pretty sure that was Giroud, actually put it into the back of the net. That stuff just can't happen. And I was willing to ride or die with the Salzburg team until the very end, really believing they had a chance to pull this off and get out of this group. And today was a turning point for me. It's not just that they lost, it's that they looked really bad doing it. Very disappointing. I really thought they had a chance, and yeah, that game was over, and it just continued to get worse. For AC Milan, first knockout stage appearance in the Champions League is 2013-14. And for Serie A as a whole, big time turning this thing around. It was going down a disastrous path, and then AC Milan stepped up, Inter Milan stepped up, and now you're talking about, 3 teams into the knockout stage. You're talking about AC Milan, and it's this progression, right? Inter is a year ahead, but win the league, get to the knockout stage, then try and go farther. AC Milan, win the league, get to the knockout stage, that's this season, and then they might be able to even speed this process up. But that was one of my criticisms of these Milan clubs and what is hurting Serie A as a whole, is the teams winning this league are then exiting early in the Champions League. Now we're finally starting to get to a point where they're at least getting into the knockout stage and giving themselves a chance. So congratulations, AC Milan. been a long time coming. They do what they need to do in impressive fashion to get out of Group E. And then the other really interesting group that turned out to be incredibly dramatic, Group D. In the end, it is Spurs and Eintracht Frankfurt who move on. At one point, it looked like neither the other two teams in this group were going to move on early. Spurs, another abysmal first half, both for their on-field performance and the fact that you lost Son Heung-min, who apparently Spurs have announced is going to undergo surgery to repair some kind of facial fracture, I think is the diagnosis. Doesn't seem to be a timeline on this, which is incredibly concerning if you're South Korea. Hopefully he's able to come back. I haven't seen anything talking about him missing the World Cup other than we just don't know for sure yet. So hopefully he gets a couple weeks here, even if he doesn't play for Spurs again, and is good to go for South Korea. And from a Spurs standpoint, before I get to the rest of this game, I've continued to not want to use the loss of these attackers as an excuse or a reason, because they spent too much money, because they should be way more ambitious going forward, whether Dejan Kulusevski or Charleston is on the field or not. But now you're getting to a point where you're talking about Harry Kane and Lucas Moura as basically the only healthy attacking players on this team. That is a really rough situation in which I'm much more willing to give you slack if Son ends up missing these next couple games and isn't back until after the World Cup. But at the end of the day, it was before Son got hurt, after Son got hurt in that first half. No matter who is on the field, it simply has to be better. I'm not going to give that whole spiel again. But they give up a goal and they just didn't really cause any kinds of problems for Marseille. Second half, different story. Showed up with attacking intent, rose to the occasion, got the goal they needed, and then Pierre-Emile Højbjerg adds the second at the very end, which unfortunately for Marseille sent them out of Europe entirely. Eintracht Frankfurt in the other game go behind, which is why it looked like there was a moment where Marseille and Sporting Lisbon were feeling really good, and then they both concede two unanswered goals, and it just kind of falls apart. So your end result, Spurs, Eintracht Frankfurt through, Sporting to the Europa League, which is a deserving reward for how good they were in this Champions League group. It would have been incredibly harsh for them to go from being so close to going through to not getting to participate in Europe at all. And it is Marseille who miss out a better Champions League performance, but the bar is, on the floor considering their recent past history. Ultimately, it's another massive disappointment. For whatever reason, this competition and this team it's not going well together. These past handful of appearances, I don't know what it is. To me, they were one of the big winners in Europe last season, and were really headed down a positive path after some really dark moments there. And now it's, right there was a moment where they were hanging in there Champions League wise, giving them a chance, right up there pushing PSG, and now it's just kind of all falling apart. We'll see if they can sort of pick the pieces up now that they don't have these European games to focus on. But I would have mentioned that too, just because they're always a fascinating storyline in the Champions League for me. And this group just could have gone any which number of ways. And ultimately, it's Marseille who lose out, Spurs and Frankfurt who are your big winners because they get the job done. Before I get off the Champions League and start talking MLS Cup, I want to just go through quickly and kind of talk about the round of 16. We're not going to have the draw for a few days. I believe it's Monday. But your group winners, your quote-unquote seeded teams, Manchester City, Real Madrid, Bayern, Napoli, Benfica, Chelsea, Tottenham, Porto. And that is essentially my sort of power ranking. That was kind of what I went to do here real quickly is team I want to play the least to team I would like to play the most if I'm on the other side of this. So if I'm an unseeded team, that runner-up in the group, Manchester City is the team I want to avoid the most for obvious reasons. As long as Erling Haaland is healthy, they're the most talented team in the world. And they typically do a pretty good job in at least the first couple rounds. It's a lot of semifinal losses and the occasional quarterfinal. It's not like they collapse in the round of 16. Number 2 for me is Real Madrid. Still not particularly inspired, but then again, I wasn't inspired last season. They still found a way to win the whole thing. Just them in this competition, I want no part of. It's as simple as that. And you're looking at these other teams, and I have some questions or concerns about them that if there's nobody else I feel really, really good about, give me the team that just finds a way in this competition all the time. Number 3, team I want to avoid is Napoli. I couldn't put them higher than 3rd because a team that doesn't have a track record of success in this competition, I can only be so scared of. That being said, I'm about as scared as Napoli if I'm a runners-up team than I can possibly be for a team that isn't used to going to the semifinals of this tournament. They are sensational. I don't really care that they lost to Liverpool in that final game. They were going to lose at some point. There's an argument it's even better that they did it in a way that doesn't hurt them at all. So they are the 3rd team I'd want to avoid. Next on that list is Bayern Munich. They are playing much, much better. They look like terrifying Bayern again. I need to be sure last season isn't going to repeat itself, and we can't find that out in the group stage as good as they were. But they're also just playing better than pretty much everybody else. So they're the 4th team on my power rankings. 5th, Benfica. Again, couldn't put them higher. Haven't seen them do it deep into this competition. There are more talented teams out there, even in the runners-up. But they're playing phenomenally well. So they're the 5th team I would want to avoid. 6th is Chelsea. I still believe in Graham Potter. I still believe in this team. You've got guys who have won this competition. It hasn't been great lately. So I feel, that's just out of the 8 options, this is the 3rd one I would choose, basically. Right? 6th in my power rankings if you're going from 1 to 8. So I don't feel terrible if I draw Chelsea. I just feel even better if I draw Tottenham or Porto. Tottenham because, again, yes, you got players with Champions League experience. You have a manager who hasn't been particularly good in this competition. You have plenty of players who haven't had a lot of Champions League success. And I am just fundamentally concerned about their ability to do what they need to do to make a deep run playing this way. It's going to hurt them less here, in my opinion, than in the Premier League in terms of trying to win the Premier League title. But I should be more scared of the attacking players they have, and I'm just not because of the way they play. And then 8th is Porto. Porto is a whole level behind Benfica. And you're talking about, Harry Kane, you're talking about Chelsea, Bayern, Napoli, Real Madrid, Man City are your other options. That was the easiest part for me. If I'm a runners-up team, I want Porto. Then power rankings for the runners-up, if I'm a team that won my group, the team I want to avoid is PSG. So I've got PSG 1, obvious reasons. Somehow, some way, they didn't win that group. The expectation is to win this tournament. That can't really be said of any of these other runners-up. It's a huge deal that now they have to... Right, there's a 50% chance you're playing Manchester City, Real Madrid, Napoli, or Bayern. You can't play Benfica because they're in your group. So unless you draw Porto, you're playing a team that is at least on the same level, kind of, talent-wise. Maybe you can argue Chelsea and Tottenham are a step behind. But this is not where PSG were supposed to be. But ultimately, they are head and shoulders the most dangerous, easily the most dangerous runners-up team. Second, I have AC Milan, starting to play really well, starting to show some consistency, which is something another Italian team that I have lower on this list has not really shown. You're defending Serie A champions. I'm not convinced they can do more than make the quarterfinals, but there are certainly teams I would rather see than AC Milan if I'm a group winner. Third, Liverpool. Partially out of my consistent loyalty to Jurgen Klopp and my unwavering belief he's going to figure things out eventually, somehow, some way. Partially because by the time we actually get to the round of 16, this Liverpool team is going to be much healthier. And we're also getting to a point where this is, qualifying for the Champions League next season is the goal. But you're not talking about a Premier League title run here. So all of a sudden, you put that little bit of added emphasis on the Champions League. These are guys who know how to win this competition, consistently deliver. So they are, in spite of everything, they're the third team I would want to avoid, sort of third on my runners-up power rankings. Fourth is Borussia Dortmund. I'm still a believer in this Dortmund team. I've been a little bit disappointed so far. But Jude Bellingham is absolutely loving this competition. And there are four, and then there are four for me. There's kind of this clear dividing point at the halfway line. And Dortmund fall just on the upper side of that. And then we get to the bottom one. So fifth for me, Inter Milan. You can argue they're better, more talented, whatever, than Borussia Dortmund. I need to see Inter Milan actually beat some really good teams. Because it's been Barcelona and that's it. And Barcelona have their own shortcomings. They have not been anywhere near as consistent enough for me to be really scared of them if I'm, Bayern. Well, I'm not going to play Bayern. But if I'm Real Madrid or Chelsea or Tottenham or somebody. Then sixth, Red Bull Leipzig. Couldn't put them ahead of Inter just because Inter have proven a lot more. And at any point, this could go back into disaster mode for Leipzig. But right now, Marco Rose has got this thing going. Still not convinced about how dangerous they really can be, which is why they're 6th out of these 8 teams for me. But certainly much more interesting conversation if you draw Leipzig than a month ago. 7th, Eintracht Frankfurt. I like Leipzig better, not by all that much. There's just something about, you got here by winning the Europa League last season and you weren't spectacular domestically. They've been good so far. I won't be scared if I draw them. And then 8th is Club Brugge. You get the benefit of a favorable group. Atletico Madrid doesn't show up. And you still have some not so convincing performances and some convincing ones. Just everybody else is a step above. So if that's the team you're trying to draw. If you are anybody in that winners, the teams at the top of the group, you're trying to get Club Brugge in my mind. And it's also interesting because the teams I have at the bottom of this for both sections here came from the same group, which is a commentary on Atletico Madrid and how disappointing and embarrassing that was. But B, it makes it interesting because obviously they can't play each other. So I'll run through this one more time, my sort of power rankings from the winners. Manchester City, Real Madrid, Napoli, Bayern Munich, Benfica, Chelsea, Tottenham, Porto. And from the runners up, PSG, AC Milan, Liverpool, Borussia Dortmund, Inter Milan, Red Bull Leipzig, Eintracht Frankfurt, and Club Brugge. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. When I come back, it is MLS Cup time. We have the matchup this league deserves. We finally have one seeds who actually got there, so we don't have to talk about everybody being a disappointment. This is going to be spectacular, so it is time to set the scene for MLS Cup. You are watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. It is time to talk MLS Cup. Going to kind of break this preview down into a couple different sections. This matchup in particular, there are some really interesting things to discuss about the short history between these two teams, specifically at Banc of California Stadium. So that is where I'm going to start, and then, like I've been doing throughout the MLS and NWSL playoffs, sort of my three keys, my three things to look at for this game. And then I've added a new section just for MLS Cup, talking about an X factor for each team. So let's jump in, starting with the history between these two teams. Philadelphia Union, LAFC have played 4 times. One of those resulted in a team winning. That was LAFC back in 2018. Since then, 3 draws. If you remember, we've had some phenomenal games between these two teams at Banc of California Stadium. And this is one of the things that needs to be emphasized heading into this game. And I'm still trying to figure out exactly what it means to me, because on one hand, the Philadelphia Union are not scared of going into that building. 2 of the best performances they've had in this 3-year stretch, where they won a Supporters' Shield, nearly got to MLS Cup last season and had the COVID situation, and got to MLS Cup this season, since they've become arguably the best, most consistent team in MLS. 2 of their best performances came at LAFC. And they didn't win either of those games. So you can kind of spin that any way you want, where they're not going to be intimidated by that environment. They're capable of playing really well there. But can they actually win if they already played that well and still didn't beat LAFC? We're going to hopefully sort of get an answer to that question on Saturday. A couple things to note about these 2 performances in particular. It was a 2-2 draw and a 3-3 draw. If you remember, the 3-3 draw was the last game in Major League Soccer before it shut down from COVID. The one where Jacob Glesnes scored from outside the stadium. And Carlos Vela, I believe that was also the game he had a brilliant free kick. Quite possibly the best, most entertaining Major League Soccer regular season game I've ever seen. And then there was a 2-2 as well this season. The last 2 times, those 2 games at Banc of California Stadium, the Philadelphia Union have had 5 leads. They have scored first all 5 times, if you will. They have never trailed at Banc of California Stadium in those 2 games. Those leads have lasted, on average, less than 15 minutes. In the 2020 game, they lasted 9 minutes, 1 minute, and 2 minutes. This is one of the really fascinating aspects of getting this game in MLS Cup for me. Is, first of all, what happens if the Union don't score the first goal? Second, if the Union do score the first goal, can they actually hold on to a lead in this stadium? Because they have really struggled to do that. 5 opportunities, and they have allowed a goal to LAFC every single time. Okay, into the keys. First, I'm going to keep talking about this because it's so vital to what the Philadelphia Union do. And in this matchup in particular, because of the transformation LAFC has undergone this season under Steve Cherundolo. Transition moments. In theory, LAFC is going to be the team with more of the possession, with the responsibility and the pressure. How do LAFC deal with that? Because they are not playing a team like Austin who is willing to have the ball. The Union want no part of the ball, which makes this a really interesting tactical matchup. Because LAFC also want to beat you in those transition moments. I've mentioned this before. If you go back and look at their possession numbers, they have decreased dramatically since the Bob Bradley era. Meaning the season. So who has more of the ball? Can they find a way to still sort of get those transition moments? Or are the Union going to be able to do what the Union want to do? Because there's a real argument. This game plays into so many of the things the Union do well. There's no pressure on them. They're not at home. They're the underdogs. They've kind of had to adjust their mindset now that they're kind of the team everybody is hunting, at least in the East. This game allows them to go back to being the scrappy underdogs, which is another really interesting aspect of this. So, who has more of the ball? If it is LAFC like I expect it to be, how do they deal with that? Second, who can actually limit the other team from getting out in transition? It is what the Union do. It's how they want to play. Can you stop the ball from getting into Daniel Gazdag's feet? Because he has been phenomenal at then getting the ball to Julian Carranza and Michael Ura, and the three of them, linking up together, holding play, holding the ball up. It's sensational. If you're LAFC, that's what you have to stop. And if you're the Union, you don't want Denny Buwanga and Carlos Vela and Chicho Arango running at you. They are taking their opportunities, all three of them. Buwanga's in really good form now. Arango's still scoring goals. Carlos Vela is going to be ready. So this is where the game is going to be decided for me. Is who gets to kind of do this their way, so to speak. And do we have one or two clear transition opportunities that ultimately determine this game? Second, not going to overthink this one too much. The front threes for both teams. Big time players make big time plays in big time games. Your big time players, with the exception of Andre Blake and the Union's back line, for the most part, generally speaking, your big time players are up front for both of these teams, as is the case with most soccer teams in the world. Unions have not been particularly noisy or successful, with the exception of the end of that NYCFC game. Carranza scored, then Carranza creates that second goal for Gazdag, and all of a sudden, now the production looks much better. But the first half against NYCFC, that entire Cincinnati game, so 3/4 of the playoff minutes essentially, they have not been particularly effective at creating chances. That is a concern. They have to be better in this game. Now, the flip side to that is these guys are too good to stay quiet for that long. This could be the game where they are absolutely brilliant. And on LAFC's side, this is why you spent all the money. You've got the best attacking trio in the league. They got to deliver. And then the other part of this for me is what happens when you start making substitutions. Corey Burke came on and scored a goal for the Union against NYCFC. Corey Burke is incredibly difficult to deal with. Corey Burke works incredibly hard. He just makes your life miserable, as does this entire Union front three. It's the other part of what they do is they do the dirty work incredibly well. And then on LAFC side, are you taking one of these three guys out of the game? If so, who? And if you are, who is coming in? Does Gareth Bale have a role to play here? Is Muhalo Poku? Do you get a drop-off if you do have to make a sub for some reason? All of it sort of goes into just which of these teams gets more production, has a better game from their front three. Because that's going to play right into those transition moments. And that's where this game is going to be won or lost, is who gets the most out of their best players, who gets the ball to their best players the most. And then the third thing I'm looking at, the number sixes. They are very different players, which makes this really interesting to talk about. But there are a couple things going on here. Another important part of this game is going to be the Union's press. And the idea that part of what the Union like to do is cause chaos. They like to disrupt teams, force turnovers, right? It's a similar approach to Liverpool in that sense. Elie Sanchez is the opposite of chaos. So one of these two things has to give. Either the Union are going to be able to get that press going, they're going to be able to sort of really bother LAFC as they're trying to build and make the game ugly, which LAFC are more equipped to deal with now. That was my big criticism under Bob Bradley. They didn't have, when they couldn't play this beautiful open possession-based game, they didn't have a plan B. That has changed this season. But it all starts with Ilie Sanchez being able to set the tempo. Can the Union stop him from doing that successfully? And on the other side of it, can Ilie Sanchez be the guy to sort of be that outlet and break this press? With his passing ability, with his vision, his understanding of the game, all of the stuff that makes him a great player. Because if he is unbothered and he's able to just go about his business the way he typically does, the Union are in trouble. Part of this has to be stopping him from getting those passes that break your lines and get the ball going quickly the other way to those guys who, again, want to play in transition. All that starts with that midfield, and that midfield starts with Ilie Sanchez. On the Union side, Jose Martinez. 1, can he keep his head? Does he get a yellow card in the first 15 minutes and have to change the way he plays? Does he get a yellow card in the first 15 minutes, make a reckless challenge in the 57th, and get sent off? Or is he able to walk that line that sometimes he struggles with and he goes right up against and put in another really, really good performance? Because he's so important to what the Union do. And his distribution is getting to the point where it's underrated and underappreciated. He is the guy that is going to be able to stop LAFC from getting into all of those transition moments. He's going to be able to break play up. He's going to be able to make it chaotic. He's going to stop them from being able to sort of connect all of these passes and make it disjointed and get the Union going the other way. So if it's not going to be decided by the front three and the big names, the other spot I'm looking at is that number 6 position. They're very different players. They play the position completely differently, but they are still both instrumental to what their teams do. And if one of them feels like they have a greater impact on this game, that's going to go a long way to determining who ultimately is going to win. X factors. On the Union side, Jack McGlynn. First, does he start the game? What is the health status of Alejandro Bedoya? If he is able to give you something, but probably not 90 minutes, is it better to start him so you can hope to get him to halftime like you did against NYCFC and not burn that extra substitution window? Or are you going to try and save him and know you might have to then sub him off if he can't go? That is one of my thoughts of making Jack McGlynn the X factor, is what role does he actually play in this game? Does he start? Does he come on in the second half? Is he a prototypical sub where he enters in the 70th minute? What role does he play? And then, secondly, I'm going to lean toward he starts and sort of assume that's going to be the way this goes. And if that's the case, or if he's in there for at least 45 minutes, can Jack McGlynn be tactically aware enough and be in the right spots to stop LAFC, again, going back to transition? One of the things you'll look at with that NYCFC goal, I saw Matt Doyle point this out of MLSsoccer.com. That space, it's called Zone 14, right in front of the 18-yard box. Jose Martinez had vacated it. Jack McGlynn didn't fill in. How often do you see Alejandro Bedoya end up in that area to go make a tackle, to block a pass, to get in somebody's way? It is all of those little things that make Alejandro Bedoya so great and so important to this team and allows this system to work as well as it does. Jack McGlynn gives you a lot of great things, and I'm going to get to those next. But if you're making those kind of mistakes and you're allowing LAFC to pick up those kind of spaces, they are going to punish you. And that one moment could very well decide this game. So that's the first part of this, is if Jack McGlynn's playing a key role, can he deliver from an understanding the game, where he is on the field, taking away space, all of those kind of things, just the overall tactics of it. Second, on the positive side with Jack McGlynn, can his passing be the difference in this game? He is a phenomenal passer. And there's sort of two facets to this. One, you saw what he can create in terms of goal-scoring chances with that cross he put in to Carranza for one of those goals against NYCFC. You've seen him score at least one really good goal is coming to mind because he's a phenomenal technician. So there's that part of it of he has the ability to make that one, special moment of brilliance that decides a game. The other part of it is, can he be the connector from the defense to the attack for the Union? So much of, if you watch the Union play, so much of their buildup is, well, there's a decent amount on the left because of Kai Wagner. But from a midfield standpoint, it is so heavily skewed to the right because of Alejandro Bedoya and the way he gets up and down the field. Leon Flock is just not the kind of player who's going to make those passes and is going to take guys one-on-one and combine and make runs into the box. All the stuff Alejandro Bedoya does. So if, from a build-up standpoint, a lot of it comes down the right. Or it's Kai Wagner overlapping on the left. But if Jack McGlynn's in there instead of Alejandro Bedoya, he's now the guy responsible for that. And he's certainly capable of doing so. This is much more in his skill set and the stuff he's really good at. But it's not just his ability to break lines with the passes. It's also his ability to set tempo. His ability to just make the simple pass that then leads to something positive for his team. It's one of the things I love about him. He's already great at this. He has great understanding of what is happening around him when he has the ball and kind of what he needs to do to keep the team moving forward. That is going to be really, really important in this game. So those are kind of the two sides of this Jack McGlynn X Factor. Does he become a liability because he doesn't have, decade plus of experience and year 7 or 8 or something for Bedoya with this Union team now? Or does the raw skill and the raw ability he has end up being a positive? Time will tell whether this ends up being a huge storyline or just kind of a minor note that maybe he comes on in the 75th minute because the Union need a goal and he has an opportunity to change the game. It could be that simple, but when I'm thinking X factors for the Union, because I just have, nobody really knows what role he's going to play, I went with Jack McGlynn. On the LAFC side, Jose Cifuentes. The reason for this is fairly simple. I wasn't going to go with Gareth Bale because I'm not convinced Gareth Bale can make a difference in this game. I'm not convinced he's going to have the opportunity to. With whatever injuries he's got going on, I had a hard time getting to a point where I was considering him an X factor. So I went with Cifuentes instead. Partially because you look at that bench and there isn't somebody that screams difference maker. That was supposed to be Gareth Bale or whatever combination of substitutes. It could be Opoku. But I went with something I feel more confident in, and that is Cifuentes. He is the guy from this LAFC midfield that actually contributes to goals. Ilie Sanchez, incredibly important. I talked about everything he does for this team. Kellen Acosta, terrific free kick taker, plays, both sides, offense, attack and defense. The guy who actually gets up the field and joins the attack from a getting inside the box and making things happen in the box standpoint is Cifuentes. And my thought process behind this being really important in this game is that I'm not convinced you're going to be able to beat that combination of Blake, the back four, and Martinez with 3 guys. You need other runners in the box because those center backs are so good. And this is sort of operating in a world where this game looks And it's quite possible because it's a final, it looks very different. But if we get another high scoring game, another wide open game, the Union have proven there are goals in there for them to get at this stadium. So you're probably not talking about a 1-0 unless this goes very differently because it is a cup final. And that's another interesting part of this that I hadn't really thought about until now is just, do we get the same kind of game? Because I kind of think we're going to. In that situation where goals are coming in and you're not just trying to win 1-0, you got to get guys in the box. You got to have more people causing problems that need to be paid attention to than just that front three, as good as they are. I trust Blake and the 5 guys in front of him to be able to generally deal with that. And also you can throw Leon Flock in there because Leon Flock is great defensively too. And also, let's just say it's not the best day at the office for that front three. Who else can come in and make a difference and actually put that goal on the board, whether it's them scoring it themselves or the assist? And it's Jose Cifuentes. His numbers are really good. He very well may be on his way to Europe after this game. He is one of the more underappreciated players in MLS because he's not a big name on this team. He's just another one of those guys that you look up and, oh yeah, he's one of the best players in the league at his position. He's been sensational. So that's the guy I'm looking for, because to me it's cheating to say that Arango or Buanga or Carlos Vela is an X factor. They're just key factors. To me, X factor means something different. So those are your X factors. Jack McGlynn for Philadelphia, Jose Cifuentes for LAFC. I will make my prediction now. It's kind of a prediction. I will say this. If I'm Philadelphia, I kind of quietly feel confident about this, knowing the pressure is not on me whatsoever. My thought process from the beginning of the playoffs was one of these two teams was going to get to MLS Cup, was going to host MLS Cup, and was going to win MLS Cup. Now, I had LAFC losing El Tráfico. So that pick for me was the Union. So I'm going to stick with that even though I feel much less confident about it now because I needed to see LAFC prove to me they could win in multiple ways, and they have proven that. They are not just the most talented team in this league. They are a team now equipped to succeed in the postseason. It's not an accident. This is the season they made it to MLS Cup. But at the end of the day, if you look at all of the things that allow a team to be successful in the postseason, this applies across the board. I've sort of taken this from talking college basketball. The Union still have the best goal difference in the league. The Union still have the best defense in the league. The Union have an attack that scored as many goals as, you can give the slight edge to LAFC, that's fine. The Union now have the difference makers that can be the best player on the field in a game like this, in Gazdag and Carranza and Ura. The Union were more consistent throughout the season. I've said this before, I'll mention it one more time. If this were any other league in the world, the Union would be hosting this game as Supporters' Shield champions. Supporters' Shield winners, I should say. So my head says you're not beating LAFC in front of the 32-52. My heart says this Union team really has been the best team in the league all season. And it was my prediction, so I'm going to stick with it. If you would have told me LAFC was getting to MLS Cup, I would have picked LAFC to win. I will acknowledge that much. But I didn't think we were going to get both 1 seeds. That was where I was wrong, but also backed up by years and years of data suggesting this wasn't going to happen. I'm thrilled that it did. So I'm gonna stick with what I predicted going in, which is the Philadelphia Union to win MLS Cup. This should be a phenomenal game. I cannot wait. We are going to get ourselves a champion of the highest order, from regular season performance to postseason. There is nothing you can say about either of these teams. Hopefully we just get a phenomenal open game like these teams have played at Bank California Stadium in the past. and we will see what happens from there. I will have full coverage after the game, planning to be in the press conference, so be sure to be on the lookout for a recap video as well as my written match report on Substack, touchlinetalk.substack.com. It will also be posted on Medium. Forgot to mention that too. I'm going to take one more break here before we get into the weekend look ahead. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back one more time to the Touchline Talk Show. It is time for the weekend look ahead. Obviously, already talked about MLS Cup, so I'm not going to mention that here. Our NWSL season is over, so we are exclusively focused on Europe at this point. Starting in England, Fulham at Manchester City on Saturday. Erling Haaland's been out for a couple games now. Fulham still playing incredibly well. This is one of those games City shouldn't drop points, but I kind of wouldn't be stunned if they do. And they haven't been playing particularly well. Kevin De Bruyne bailed them out against Leicester with a phenomenal free kick and then had a terrific assist to kind of get them going against Sevilla. Sevilla. So he's really been carrying this team the past week. Something says this is going to be a draw. Maybe I come out looking silly and City win 4-0, but something inside me says Fulham's going to come in there and cause some problems. And then two phenomenal games. Arsenal at Chelsea on Sunday, followed by Liverpool at Tottenham on Sunday. Another test for Arsenal. You're getting in danger if you don't get 3 points. You're giving control back to Manchester City, and that is not a place you want to be. From a Chelsea standpoint, this is not exactly the game you want, considering where they're on this little bit of a winless streak in the Premier League. This could be the win that really sort of catapults the Graham Potter era from good to super exciting, because it was almost there, and then they've had this little skid lately. And then Liverpool-Tottenham, two teams that are kind of slipping in the top four race while Newcastle, Manchester United continue to gain momentum and confidence. Liverpool, this is an opportunity to take points off of a team that you are trying to compete for top four with. And you've dropped an awful lot of points to teams that are not in the top four conversation. And Tottenham, got to continue to be really good at home with your struggles on the road. This is a game you should get 3 points from if you want to finish top four this season. And these are two incredibly banged up teams. Which one of them can just kind of get to the World Cup break in a reasonable position, regroup, and get going the second half of the season? Spain, Almeria at Barcelona on Saturday. And then the other game I want to mention real quickly is Sevilla at Real Betis on Sunday. Betis having a really good start to the season. Sevilla in the relegation zone as we speak. That has gone horribly wrong. I had them in my preseason top 25, even though they lost their center backs. And it is not gone that way at all. So, this is a game Betis at home should win. And that just puts Sevilla in an even worse situation. Can you get some confidence going and put some points on the board if you're Sevilla? Italy, phenomenal weekend in Italy. Napoli at Atalanta, your top of the table clash on Saturday. Lazio at Roma, derby on Sunday. Inter at Juve, derby on Sunday. Doesn't get much better than that. Napoli, how do you respond to a loss? And you go into Bergamo and you get yourself 3 points. All of a sudden, you are building yourself a nice cushion at the top of this league. Lazio at Roma, two teams trying to get that top four race. This is just one of the best rivalries in the sport. And then Inter at Juventus. Inter, this should be a win considering how depleted Juventus are. Juventus, can you take some confidence from what you did against PSG, find a way to win this game, and all of a sudden put yourself in a better spot, in a better situation, just in terms of where the season is at before the World Cup, when you can start getting some players back? Germany, Bochum at Dortmund on Saturday, Bayern at Hertha Berlin on Saturday, and Union Berlin at Bayer Leverkusen on Sunday. That's your game of the weekend in the Bundesliga. And then France, PSG at Lorient on Sunday, and Lyon at Marseille on Sunday. Marseille, got to stop the bleeding in one of these competitions. You're out of Europe now. Your goal's got to be to finish in a position where they get you back into the Champions League next season. Lyon, trying to get back into Europe. Obviously, these are two of the biggest clubs in France, so I wanted to highlight that game very quickly. That is all for this week's edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As I said at the beginning, be sure to hit that